Welcome back to the podcast by the order of the Lily and the Eagle. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Larry.
So tell me, Larry, what's been going on for you?
Well, Kevin, I've been thinking quite a bit about the fact that we've talked about dissimilarity, we've talked about this, we've talked about that, and kind of inherent in all that is knowing what's right and what's wrong for you. So if you're going to express dissimilarity, well, there's certain things that'll be right for that. There's certain things that'll be wrong. How do you know? We're stuffed with all these kinds of inputs from all around us. And how do you sort it all out?
It's not, the first thing I would say, of course, is I don't know. And when I started, and I can speak for myself on this one, when I started, it was one of those struggles. Well, what is good, what is bad, what is even what's happy, what's sad. They're just trying to understand.
Yeah, there's a lot of blurring. It's at least for me anyway.
It is difficult. So what is right and what is wrong, that's essentially moral, the morals of the person. So if they make a good action, that's morally right. If they make a bad action, it's morally wrong. But then you ask the question, well, what do you mean by good and bad? What's right and wrong?
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes very personal or subjective. It depends on the person. They have to find their own answer to that. And the question is, how do we know it's right and how do we know it's wrong?
Yes.
How do we measure that? How do we notice whether it's right or wrong?
What kind of signal is there that gives us a flag that says yes, no?
Well, the first thing is I can't tell somebody that's wrong because I'm meant to be guiding them to find out for themselves. I might have my own personal opinion, I wouldn't be doing that, but sometimes you have to let people do it to find out.
Yeah.
So the classic example is generally, but it's not always the case, but generally a sign is it doesn't feel right. It's uncomfortable. It feels wrong. Now, I can't tell you why it feels wrong or why it's uncomfortable, but in your soul, in the bit that has the emotions, there's turbulence, there's agitation, there's, I don't like this.
Yes.
But that's not enough. You need to understand why the agitation is there, why you don't like it, if you can then explain it, then you can make a decision whether you want to continue doing it or not. And then it's right for you or wrong for you to do that thing. That's one, it's a very sort of rough and ready explanation for knowing what is right or wrong. Of course, you've got the standard sort of, you shouldn't kill people. And I wouldn't expect people to go out and find out whether they like killing. Well, maybe they do, but I wouldn't want them to be in the order, because it wouldn't help matters. Go out and kill, get your initiates to go out and kill people. No, that's not. So in that case, you can do a sort of mental audit of it. You go in your head, you can say, well, I don't know what it's like to kill somebody, but I've seen the grief and the damage and the pain and the suffering. Do I want to be doing that to other people? And in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, the answer is, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to have people suffer because of my action. And ultimately, there is that sense of knowing what is right. You know it. You just know it. So you get people who will leap into raging rivers to save a child, not because genetically, DNA and all that stuff, that child is theirs. It isn't often. It's a complete, utter stranger. I've even seen people doing it with animals. They'll just leap in and save. And when the reporter comes along and goes, well, why did you do that then? What drove you to do that? And the person will go, well, anybody would do that. And to me, this is a voice that's within us, which we either pick up in our emotions, knowing what the right thing to do is, or it's beyond that. You just do it. And I think that's our higher self, that's beyond what we think is us. I call it my big Kevin and my little Kevin. Little Kevin is the one down here, involved in, all the rubbish of daily life. And there's a bigger Kevin who's looking down at little Kevin and going, oh no, you've gone and done that again. You shouldn't be doing that, Kevin, So that for me it's very important for me to know that if I can keep my emotions calm and collected, and irima in Greek, it's calm is the best word. I think of it like a mill pond. It's just dead flat. If your soul is just untroubled, then you can start to hear this higher voice which is guiding us, and generally has the best. Well, it has the best for you, but we don't hear it because our mill pond isn't smooth and still. It's jumping all around, really agitated, because it's full of all these, so you can't hear the voice which guides us whether something is right or wrong for us. So the next question is, how can you make a nice calm soul?
Yes, all of the times that my habits and my training, and I don't remember it. I'm already there. And then that's a cycle that seems to be very difficult to break.
Well, there are various techniques out there. You've got mindfulness, it's out there. You've got meditation, you've got various physical exercises like Tai Chi, yoga, which will help release those kinds of emotional agitations within you. So yes, all of those, you can do all of those, because we're all different. Each will choose their own particular technique. In the order, we have basically a breathing exercise, a very simple breathing exercise, and its main aim is to make you calm, make your soul serene. And it does work. I've seen it work. It's worked for me. And I now know that when I get into difficulties, first thing I'll do is don't forget to breathe properly. And from just breath control, you get a huge amount of physical benefit. You're getting enough oxygen into the bloodstream. You're expelling a buildup of carbon monoxide. You're breathing properly, so your lymph system is moving around your body properly. And. I mean, just the oxygen itself will help kill off cancer cells. So there's many, many things about breathing properly, and we don't breathe properly, because when we watch a computer or a TV or anything like that, our body goes on to standby breathing. We're not breathing properly. So make it a daily exercise. There you go. I, for instance, use it at a traffic light. When I've got nothing better to do, I'm sitting there waiting for a green light. I'll go, okay, start breathing properly. We have to build these things into our life, not some, I do my yoga on Thursday. I do this on that. No, it should be embedded in your life in a positive way. If you keep your soul calm, your body will be better. Keep your soul calm, your thinking will be better. And with a bit of luck, you'll start hearing your higher self, which is the thing I believe. Again, you have to discover for yourself. Don't believe Kevin. For God's sake, don't believe me. Try it and see for yourself. And that's one of the major things that comes out of the teaching. Because my experience is one thing, your experience is another thing, and they don't necessarily have to align up one to one. But there are universal things which are breathe properly. And that's it. And I think the Buddha said something similar all those hundreds, thousands of years ago, which is the one thing that's universal, you have to breathe. And based on that, do this meditation. But don't believe what I'm telling you about it. Find out for yourself. And that's directly from Buddha. Okay? But it's common sense. Everybody's different, and because of that difference, which we've said is the first theorem, there are lots of things that come from that.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose it changes over time as well. As things change in you, you know, things are going to change in the needs that you got and what is good and what's bad for you.
Well, if you revisit the theorems or revisit anything, you see something else. You notice something else. Mm-hmm. You wake up to other potentials that you never noticed before. Mm-hmm. And that's fantastic, because it's exciting. I didn't know that. Wow, I've discovered something. Mm-hmm. But not somebody told me. I found it myself. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you don't share it, but it doesn't become a new dogma in a new religion and all that stuff. No, it's that you have your personal work, in which case you can follow all sorts of things, but that doesn't mean you then teach other people what you've discovered. You give them the basic signs, theorem 1, 2, 3 and 4, which in my opinion is, if you have those 4 under your belt, you don't really need the others. Well, you do, because they're further guidance to help you in your work.
And you amplify it.
I'm not sure if amplify is the right word, but it extends it, clarifies it, amplifies it. Yes,
all those things. Yeah,
it's further. I call it signposts. Like, have a look at this now. Mm-hmm. Oh, look, you can have a look at this now. Pointers that will, point you in the right direction. So you've got the first theorem, as we've said, is talking about a thing called personality, which that's another podcast on its own, but it's a way we express ourselves, how we express ourselves physically, emotionally and mentally. Roughly, that's what personality is. And in that process, the first theorem says, and that personality is formed by the environment, i.e. everything that was around us when we were young, and is still around us, of course, and experiences. And then we have to discuss what's the difference between the environment and experiences. And I could tell you all about what I think, but at the end of the day, you have to think, well, what's the difference between the environment affecting who I am and my experiences affecting who I am? Okay, and then what can I do with it? Answer, here and now, you can choose your environment, the environment you want to be in. Okay, and also you can choose what experiences that you want to have. Now, I don't mean, I want to go on a cruise, but of course a cruise is an experience, but you may say, I'm afraid of flying. Okay, go to your local airfield and do gliding. Confront it, find out where that fear is coming from, and can I overcome it? And so you take an experience to develop who you are. So the way you can change yourself, set the environment correctly. I'll take an extreme. You're an addict, you love drugs, so what's the best place? Where is the best place to be? In a prison where you can get drugs wall to wall, or in a place in the countryside where in essence you're working the land and you won't have access to all the drugs? Probably if you want to overcome drugs and your addiction, you would choose an environment where it's not available. And it's just a thought. I don't mean, you should all rush out and start taking drugs and what have you to prove the point, but if we take a lesser extreme example, it's the same thing. You choose the environment that's going to, let's face it, if you are addicted to food, working in a restaurant is really not a good place to be. or as a cook, because you're forever tasting stuff. So anyway, we all have to work out what we need to do for ourselves. What is the right thing for us and what's the wrong thing for us? And in that example, we have to accept that we have an addictive nature. Once you've accepted that, you can then start guiding yourself to what is right and what is wrong. in terms of environment and what experiences you're going to have. What are those things in America where you eat as much as you can and, you'll win a prize and all those sort of
it's like a
food...
a pie or a hot dog eating contest.
Food thongs,
like
thonger foods, that's really not the kind of business you want to get involved with, if you're addicted to food. Not addicted, but, you have troubles with food. So that this is a right and wrong thing as well. So that's the first theorem. You understand how your personality was formed, how it's been changed by the environment, and how you can change, how you can take it further. How can you change yourself? And the guidance is use experience.
Yeah, you can create experiences that will help
You.
fill in the gaps or break up the difficulties, those kinds of things.
Correct. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then you come to the second theorem, which introduces us to what we call the faculties of the person, which break down into three: the physical faculties, the emotional faculties, the soul faculties, and the spirit faculties. And we can talk about those another time, but the fact that we have those basic things which break down into sensations of the body, emotions of the soul, and thinking for the spirit, you then have to say, is there anything else other than those three things? Well, there might be. And if you can find it, send the answer to me in an email. I would love to hear it, because I've searched that for I don't know about you, Larry. Have you?
Yeah, I have as well. Yeah.
And
everything breaks down to those three.
You can
areas.
reduce it to: is it a sensation? Is it an emotion? And is it a thought? It's often a combination of all of those.
Yeah, and it might be interesting to say the fact there are 9 faculties, 3 of each
Yeah,
level.
so there's 3 within 3.
So 3 on each level in each direction.
I won't go through the faculties because then we get into technical stuff, but essentially thinking or reasoning is of the mind, another word for spirit. In the soul or the emotional bit, you essentially have feelings, emotions. You get some other things like faith and sensitivity, let's call it. We can feel emotionally whether we like a place or a person and what have you. And it's not mental, but it's not physical either. It's
someplace in between.
I'm kind of drawn to it, type of thing. And then the physical body, we have this kind of standard. The main one, I believe, although a lot of people will say it's the senses, the 5 senses, taste, smell, and so on. But for me, it's movement, the physical body moving. Because if you look at the human body, there isn't one thing that isn't vibrating, circulating. There's movement, and that for me is the characteristic of life at the physical level.
And that's true in nature in general. Everything is.
It's difficult to see the movement in trees,
but they're there.
But they're definitely moving.
Yeah.
Right down inside, that each plant and what have you. So, but again, that's for each person to challenge and say, is that right? Is that wrong? Is it true? Is it false? And okay, so you've told me that, so what? Well, the answer to that is, well, if you stop moving physically, you're more or less dead. It's a very extreme statement, but if you've stopped moving, and it's also true for your thoughts. If your thinking has stopped moving, as in changing, adapting, discovering, then that also is a form of mental death. Ooh, we're getting too heavy now, Larry. Far too heavy. So what is right or wrong? So you have the first theorem. Second theorem is...
And again, to go back to the second theorem, it also speaks quite a bit about the things that we get stuffed with that make obstacles and difficulties for us. That also confuses how we know what's right and wrong.
Yes, I mean, a silly example was a friend of mine was talking about their grandmother had given her a recipe to make something, and she did this rather strange thing. in order for the cake to come out the way it came out. So she went to the grandmother and basically said, well, why am I doing that? And the grandmother went, I don't know. We've always done it that way. Right? So I was told the story, and I said to the woman, well, don't do that thing and see what happens. And you know what? There was absolutely no difference. So for some reason, maybe they didn't have the right container, or it wasn't working the way they wanted it, and they prodded the cake or something. And from there on in, every generation was doing the same thing, because that's what we do in our family, But there was no reason behind it. And there's a lot of stuff like that within us that if you start scratching the surface, you'll discover they're blocking us from evolving emotionally and mentally simply because it was done in the past.
And no one remembers.
Nobody remembers. There are plenty of examples in each and everybody's life. So yes, the third theorem and the fourth theorem can be kind of combined as one thing, I would say. And it comes from the first two theorems, because you say, well, what is right and what is wrong? And the question is, how do you know? So we kind of alluded to the idea that by comparison to something else, we can compare one thing to the other.
Yes.
So that's one thing, you compare it and what it feels like. Does it feel right? And all those things. But then everybody says, oh, well, I'll go to a guru, or I'll go to my religious teacher, or a psychotherapist, or my mate at work. Whatever. You can get other people's opinion, but then what are you going to do with that? You might get 10 people, and you have 10 people with a completely different set of answers to what you should or shouldn't do, whether that's right or wrong. So what do you do then? Do you add them all up and divide by 10, and there you are, do the average? No, that doesn't work, because you've got to make an action or not, So it's not about going to a wise man or wise woman or a guru or anything like that. The teaching says very simply, go to the creation / nature. Now, this is the real book that you should be reading, because everything is there, and there isn't any favour given to any person or individual by nature. It simply does what it does. It follows the laws. It doesn't deviate from the laws, and therefore we can go and look at what nature does to find out what's right and what's wrong. So that's the kind of objective truth, whereas talking to other people is a kind of subjective, because it's their opinion, not, inverted commas, the truth. Now, I've just said that.
Can you think of an example how that works?
Before I give an example, I just want to say that, of course, don't believe what I've just told you, folks. You're listening to me saying that as a statement of fact. No, it's something that you need to sit down and think about for yourself and prove to your own satisfaction that you can go to nature and get an answer. The question is, reading nature is not easy at all. And now you've asked me for an example. Okay, so thinking about that, it's not straightforward, because one of the tools that comes out of the third and fourth theorem is a thing called analogy. But that's quite complicated, not because we don't really have time to go into the depths of that tool.
And that might be another podcast.
It will be. An analogy is not easy to apply, to be honest with you.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the simplest things I can think of is that it is very rare, and I mean very rare, for an animal to fight to the death. They will basically, yes, they'll confront each other, yes, they'll butt heads or whatever, but not to the point that they end up damaging themselves to such a point that they...
And we're not talking eating,
not just for food. Basically, we're talking about for getting the woman, right? That doesn't mean that all men in the world should now put their head down like it, an animal and go around headbutting their opponent, to try and catch the woman and all that kind of stuff. No. They don't fight to the death. So human beings shouldn't be doing that. There's an analogy. But we're not animals, and animals aren't humans. They're different. They're separate. And the laws are slightly different from animals from human beings, because one abstract law is the law of binary. So, of course, we've got male and female. That's a binary, and they are different. That doesn't mean they're identical or the same. They're different, but that they do have similarities, because they will have the same faculties, whether they're male or female, or these days indeterminate. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because that's obviously very important for the people who want to be not he or she, but they, or whatever pronoun they choose. And that's great, no problem. So this is the law of nature that you can start bringing into your understanding of how or what you should be doing. However, like I said, it's not easy to read it. Now, there are plenty of books about analogy out there. I would love to give you some examples in the English language, or certainly there are some great French books, and I'm sure many of you will say, oh, you need to read this book, Kevin. Send me the book, tell me all about it, very interested. At the end of the day, we have to try and do it for ourselves, because we don't have this guru to hand to answer all our questions. And that's the point. You get some guidance and you try and take it forward yourself. So the first four theorems are essentially saying your teacher is not really anybody else other than what nature does. Because if we believe there is a higher being, a higher thing, then the higher thing, the higher being is responsible for creation. Then you would imagine that creation is a reflection of that higher being. And you've heard it somewhere before, the expression of God, this is God and his manifestations and what have you. Well, I don't know, but certainly nature has never lied to me. I've misunderstood it, but it's never lied to me. And that's the clear thing. So you've got your personality, you have a desire to make yourself free of all the environment and experiences that you've had previously. So you've got to start doing a work of cleaning. But I've got no idea what I should chuck out and what I should keep and what I should develop. This is the job of being reborn again. You choose what you will express, how you'll manifest yourself, i.e. what your personality will be. And therefore, how am I going to make a good choice or a bad choice? And the answer is, look to nature. But like we've said, the story about analogy and how to understand what nature is saying is another story. That's it.
Yep.
Now I'm going to run home.
That's probably enough for this.
Well, yes, I think so. So it is goodbye from Kevin.
And from Larry.
See you next time.